Well, welcome to all of you who braved the rainy weather to join us this evening for the Friends of the Library featured speaker. I'm Roy Scarborough. I'm the current president of the Friends of the Library. And we usually have a tradition when we start our events. And given that Bert is going to give us a presentation on the sense of place, it's particularly apropos that we read our traditional acknowledgement of the land of the native people. This is how we always begin our presentations here at SOU. So to begin, the Friends of the Hannon Library take this moment to acknowledge that Southern Oregon University is located within the ancestral homelands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Lagawas people who lived here since time immemorial. These tribes were displaced during the rapid Euro-American colonization, the gold rush, and armed conflict in 1851 and 1856. In the 1850s, discovery of gold and settlement brought thousands of Euro-Americans to their lands, leading to warfare, epidemics, starvation, villages being burned. In 1853, the first of several treaties were signed, confederating these tribes and others together, who would then be referred to as the Rogue River Tribe. These treaties ceded most of their homelands to the United States, and in return, they were guaranteed a permanent homeland reserved for them. At the end of the Rogue River Wars in 1856, these tribes and many other tribes from Western Oregon were removed to the Siletz Reservation and the Grand Ronde Reservation. Today, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and Confederated Tribes of the Siletz are the living descendants of the Takelma, Shasta, and Lagawas people of this area. The Friends of the Hannon Library encourage you to learn about the land you reside in and to join us in advocating for the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous people. Now I'm going to talk about Bert for a moment. Bert Etling is a longtime community journalist and executive editor of the Ashland News, a nonprofit community news site launched in January 2022 in Ashland. He is also editor-in-chief of the Applegator, a community news magazine serving the Applegate Valley. Bert edited the Ashland Daily Tilings from 2014 to 2019, heading a local news revival for the cherished community newspaper, and saw a five-fold increase in the local content and 30% increase in circulation. Before that, he edited the Cambrian weekly newspaper published by the San Luis Obispo Tribune, part of the McClatchy Corporation. During Bert's 13 years as managing editor of the Cambrian, the paper won numerous awards, including General Excellence, the top prize in the prestigious California Newspapers Publishers Association Better Newspapers Contest, and was head up, and also runner-up for 3 straight years. The paper also took second place in a nationwide Inland Press Association contest for 2 straight years. Etling also earned several individual awards, primarily for editorial writing and newspaper design. Personally, it's a special pleasure for me to welcome Bert, as I too came to this valley to work for a newspaper many years ago. So I want to give a few words of what community journalism should mean. I'm not sure the scope of Bert's talk today, but I would invite you to keep in mind as Bert speaks to you that for almost all of us who have practiced community journalism, it was a calling, not just a job, but a calling to service of the community, not unlike maybe a teacher or a leader of a faith-based community. There is a mission. No one does community journalism for the money or the prestige, and it's hard work. A lot of us have gotten burned out from time to time. Keep in mind that when someone from community journalism fights to open a public meeting, they're doing it not just for themselves to fill up their newspaper, they're doing it for the community. When we print the names of people who are taken into police custody, it's not to shame them, but to keep the system honest so that nobody disappears behind bars. When we pour the budget of finances for a school district or a city council, we do that for the community. When some member of the community suddenly dies from some tragic accident, or even worse, a homicide, we go to the funerals so that we represent the community and so that we can convey the words of the family that are going through the grief and so that the community can heal. I can't tell you how many times I had to do this over the years. Anyway, there will be time for some discussion. I brought a few questions. So please welcome Bert Etling.
Thank you, Roy. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to have this opportunity to talk about something that Roy just referred to. It's a calling. I started in my journalism career professionally in 1982, and then I went out of it for a while onto a printing thing, which is related but different. And I went back into journalism and took a significant pay cut because I was miserable doing what I did, and it wasn't worth it to be miserable. So it is a calling, and I don't get me started, but I think that these corporations reap a dividend, and governments do with you mentioned the teachers, religious institutions certainly, and journalism too, that people work for peanuts because they love what they do. And that's certainly true, and it's been my experience. I didn't major in journalism in college. I ended up getting a degree in philosophy. I'd been an editor of I was on the high school paper for 4 years, editor for 3 years. And I thought, okay, that's enough of that. So I was going to figure out, newspapers try and figure stuff out and document it. So I ended up, I went through political science, and that was a bunch of BS, and then English, which was more pleasant, but still a lot of words, into philosophy, where still trying to figure stuff out, but at least they acknowledge that they can't figure stuff out. At the end of the day, those classes in skepticism and epistemology have served me well in the journalism career, because you have to be skeptical about what people are telling you, and how do you know that? And epistemology, how do you know stuff? That's a lot of what we do with journalism is why do you say that? How do you know that? And we try and document that. So I'm here tonight as a guy with a philosophy degree, not a journalism degree, both trying to figure stuff out. I work for a newspaper, what's the word paper doing in there? But that's still a word that we're using for this idea of a newsroom with certain values, a cluster of things and ideas that formerly materialized in a product printed on paper and now appears in your email inbox or on a website. And we still tend to call it a newspaper. Get that all the time. Now we're published in bytes instead of on paper. I'm partly going to be talking about the current state of the industry because it's certainly of importance in news, but also talking about what I think are broader, deeper issues at play in how we think about journalism, as opposed to how many people are employed or where the revenue is coming from. But first, we're going to do that exercise. Newspapers, going back to 17th century Netherlands, the Dutch were wanted to find out what the price of tulips were, so we started issuing updates on the market. You know, might be the price of tulip bulbs, but and so it kind of starts with a business thing, and then, you know, by 18th century America, you're talking about political ideas and things. And that was leveraged by advertising. People wanted to get the word out, and the way they could get the word out was by piggybacking on this information delivery product by putting a little notice in there. So the circulation was robust because that was the way you got your news. There weren't even, you know, telephones, for Pete's sake, much less radio or television. And with the advertising, you had a robust revenue stream supplemented by subscriptions, but that historically was like 70% advertising and 30% other revenue, including circulation, and profits. When I was working for Knight Ridder, the major stockholders wanted to sell it off because we were only making 25% profit. And Gannett was making 30. So you must be doing something wrong. So Gannett, USA Today, those people. So it ended up getting sold to McClatchy, which borrowed a bunch of money to do that, which led to a whole other set of issues. But McClatchy was a great outfit, but now they've been bought out by another corporate raider, Gatehouse, which is owned by a Japanese bank ultimately. So go figure. So things started going downhill. I think the peak 2005, 2006 was the last good year for newspapers, and things were going downhill a little bit. And then the 2008 crash happened, and you know the wheels really came off. So the internet, you know, as much as Google and Facebook have stolen the revenue from newspapers and Craigslist, which is interesting because it stole the classifieds, but they didn't really monetize what they were doing. Interesting business model there, but newspapers, that word again, tend to have more readers than ever because more people are seeing the stories that they're printing, but they're not getting the revenue because the revenue was attached to the advertising. If you put up the paywalls, and the New York Times, I think it was 2015, finally crossed the lines crossed where they were getting more revenue from subscriptions than they were from advertising. So that's a big deal, and they've been able to make that subscription model work from a privately owned profit-making corporation. So the model is broken, but there's still a need. The revenue has gone away from delivering that service, the information service to communities, but the need's still there. So how are we going to do that? So Ashland News, for one, is a nonprofit model where we've done a nonprofit corporation, 501c3, and are doing that. And we're part of the Institute for Nonprofit News Network, which when I learned of it around 2020, had about 200 members, and now it's over 400. So, 3 years, it's doubled in size. So that's an emerging model. Since 2005, that peak year, more than a quarter of the country's newspapers closed, 25%, 1 in 4. And the ones that are still there are employing fewer people. They've shed journalists at an alarming rate. There are roughly 60% fewer journalists working in newspapers today than in 2005. And according to Pew Research, the local news ad revenue went from $510 billion in 2008 to $10 billion by 2020. So that's not just precipitous, that's just wiping clean the newspaper, local news ad revenue. So for an industry that in its heyday drew about 70% of its revenue from advertising, that is an existential crisis. Now, Google and Facebook, where did that money go? Well, they reported $115 billion in ad revenue in 2021. No, I'm sorry, that's just Meta, that's just Facebook. And Google had 209 billion. Okay, so now you got north of 300 billion, and there used to be 500 billion out there. So somebody's saving some money. So newspapers were subsidized by advertising. 3/4 of the costs were paid for by businesses buying access to your attention. So basically you were the product. Your attention, your time was what was on the market. And this economic flow was circuitous. Advertisers paid publishers for access to you. You bought their products, the department store, autos, whatever, and they bought advertising. Publishers were selling access to advertisers to influence you. What we're doing now at Ashland News is we're working on the public radio model. The people who use the product, who derive value from the product, support it through a nonprofit corporation, through direct donations to Ashland News. We do have some sponsors like as public radio has, they're calling them underwriters at JPR. I worked in traditional media for decades, and the boss was always either a corporation or an individual who was trying to make money. And now I'm working for a nonprofit, and the boss is a board that's beholden to the nonprofit's mission, which is, in the case of Ashland News, to establish a sustainable news service that will inform the civic dialogue and promote cultural engagement by providing accurate, trustworthy, and timely local and useful news and information about Ashland and surrounding areas. This nonprofit model is a contract directly between the provider of the information, us, and those who benefit from us, our readers and supporters, we hope. And where will that get us? Well, we hope that this is our vision. This is where we hope accomplishing our mission will get us, to a place where residents of Ashland and adjacent communities are engaged in an informed conversation and effective collaboration representing diverse points of view, seeking a shared understanding and a common way forward. Now, news is essential to the community, and it's essential for civic engagement. It's a value to the community. We have a lot going on in this time, in this town. All times are transitional. It's how you get from yesterday to tomorrow. But especially now, for OSF is going through some changes, partly due to COVID, wildfires, a number of things. And SOU, as we're all of mind this week and in coming weeks, and the city too, are going through changes, as well as this school district and the hospital. They're all community institutions working to adapt to a changing economic landscape and social landscape too. Issues such as earning a living wage, finding an affordable place to live, especially for younger families, essential to a town's vibrancy, will require considered, informed policymaking. And that's what we're here to help enable. It's not possible without a community news source. Okay, so that's the economic part. So let's talk more about the community identity. And my observations are informed. I didn't do a PowerPoint, but I want some newspapers. My observations are informed by editing community newspapers in a string of small communities. The San Ynez Valley, we got San Ynez Valley News, which has 2 papers a week. One's free and one's paid, extra edition. The Cambrian, which was both San Ynez and Cambria on California Central Coast. The Ashland Tidings. And it was funny, when I started the Cambrian, they were transitioning to a tabloid. Okay, fine. I had been with the broadsheet, and we did the Cambrian, which the Night Rider folks thought that that's how a local paper should be, a tabloid. And I came to Ashland, they said, okay, we're transitioning to tabloid. I said, okay, fine, I've done that. So we did the tabloid thing for a while. And then after my time at the Ashland Tidings ended, I worked for another local community paper, the Applegator. It's a great little thing, also a tab, slightly larger, colors of Berliner, I think. It's a great thing. So they're all community papers, and they're all small communities. 6,000, Ashland was the big one, 22,000. Well-educated tend to be the demographics, well-to-do, the economics are good. Older. People in Ashland think they're old. The median is like 48. Cambria was 54, I think. So it's like, well, I have you. And in Cambria, our penetration, which is another trade term, which is the number of people in the community who read it, ended up being like 110%, because they were counting subscriptions, and we had a lot of people who had second homes there. So there was subscriptions going out of town, and people who were thinking of coming there that didn't yet own the second home, who subscribed to the real estate thing, which stopped printing about a month ago. After it was founded in 1932, I think. So didn't quite make it to 100 years. It's still online, and it's still part of McClatchy now. So these are communities with a strong sense of place. They have a strong identity. They're proud of where they live. They're glad to be where they are. They want to be where they are, and they really identify with their paper. It's their newspaper. And I would hear this over and over. What are you doing with our newspaper? You know. So they're the kind of communities where the big news is like the Elks Parade. Sandy knows the Elks were big. Spring, we would run a story about spring. They made fun of it on Parks and Recreation, but it's true. Like all good humor, it has some truth to it. They're celebratory. Obviously, we covered crime and politics, but they also talk about all the good things in the community that are going on and what your neighbors are doing. And that's been my career largely, is in the community journalism. And I like that, not just, I think it's true to how we really live our lives. You know, when you get to the larger papers, then you get into the thing with, you need to get the hard news in there. So you're covering the accidents and the crime. And so you get a disproportionate share of that. The larger the town you get, the more that disparity happens. I came across an article recently that was published by Knight Ridder some years ago, 2000, about somebody who moved to Ashland of all places. This was actually picked it up out of the Charlotte, North Carolina paper. And they quoted Gary Vaughan. Gary, you heard that? No. The thing about a small town is if your kids are doing something good, you can read about it in the paper. He said, of course, if they're doing something bad, you can also read about it. You know, the bigger the coverage area, the more you're going to read about hard news, accidents, crime, all the bad things that can happen. As humans, and this is natural, as humans, we derive evolutionary advantage from knowing what the bad things are and how to avoid them. We want to figure that thing out. Whenever we hear somebody died, we want to know how old they were and what killed them. So we cannot do whatever that thing does. There was an interview on JPR the other day with Margaret Atwood, the author of A Handmaid's Tale, and she talked about, if you read the newspapers, you'll know that the worst captures attention much more than the best. She's a good writer, so she summarizes in few words what I've been blathering on about. So your metro papers, you have a disproportionate share of bad news. Local papers don't bury or disregard the bad news. It just takes up a lesser proportion of the report, just as it takes up, we hope, a lesser proportion of the lives we're actually living. Now, in the news coverage, it's nice to have choices. If you're in Los Angeles in a time when they had two major dailies, you could be living in the Los Angeles that's the LA Times or the Herald Express. One's more lively and one's more business oriented and politically more conservative, or the San Francisco of the Examiner or the Chronicle, or the New York Times or the New York of the Post or the Times. And these are all newspapers that are reporting on the same community, but you're seeing a little bit different vision. You're getting it through a different lens. Now, in these small town papers, they're a rallying point. There's something. I like the May flag, the maypole thing, where you kind of wrap around that maypole and all kinds of different strands that are coming together in that thing. The paper's flag, and this thing at the top of the page, not the masthead, it's the flag, is the community's flag to a great extent. People talk about the media, and the media is a collective bundle of all sorts of things, but it's usually what people are thinking about are the large TV networks, a couple of big city newspapers, New York, Washington, LA, some radio, but maybe a dozen or two outlets that are the media. But the word media has a related but distinct scientific meaning. It's how something gets from one place to another. So we're talking about how information gets from what's happening to the public, and it's mediated by a reporter, editor, publisher. All those things go into that mediation. There's the idea of how you're framing the journalistic report. There was an interview published recently, this week actually, with Stephen Waldman, who is co-founder of Report for America, and he's been taking a look at this big picture for quite a while on a large scale. And Report for America connects young reporters with newsrooms, pays half their salary for a year, and he's left that Report for America is still going on, but he's now co-founded another group, Rebuild Local News, that supports local newsroom funding. And in the interview, he talks about a few things. This is going to come back to what he sees the value of journalism as and what local reports should be. He says 59%. I think I said 60% earlier. Very good. In newsroom employees in the last 20 years. And that leaves thousands of communities with no coverage at all, or ghost newspapers, where the corporations have come in and slashed the staff. They keep the paper open so they can keep what advertising's left. And but the staffing's not there to support local coverage. Now, the purpose, Waldman says, of local news is actually to serve the community. And what does that mean? It means sometimes it's doing things that are controversial and surprising in the traditional sense, like accountability journalism and investigations. But sometimes it just means providing information that's useful to people. I remember with Knight Ridder, and Knight Ridder is a great outfit. They spent money on training their staff. They flew me places to do training and things, and they did studies and tried to figure out what we're doing and how to do it better. And one of the things they did was they ended up with the 7 tenets of journalism. And I don't remember them all. Being first was part of it, the things you usually think about, but being reliable and trustworthy, maybe I can't get there. But the two things that most drove readership were being local and useful. And I had a publisher of one of the papers who had somebody in the ad department made them they photoshopped something. There was a street sign that said at the intersection of local and useful. And that was the mantra. So back to Waldman's remarks. The purpose of local news is to actually serve the community. Sometimes it just means providing information that's useful to people. I confess, this is Waldman here, I confess to having fallen victim early on in Report for America to the bias of feeling like accountability reporting is the only reporting that mattered. When we first started, we really pushed that a lot. And that's the thing where you want to get the scoop, you want to do the investigative journalism, dig deep, hold the public accountable, or hold the public officials accountable, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted is the way the mantra goes. But it goes on. I think we came to realize that healthy communities need to have their local media reflect them in terms of cultural events, obituaries, high school sports, the things that are really important in people's lives. They don't necessarily involve bringing down the mayor, but involve making people's lives better in a concrete way. And in helping people to know their neighbors better. I go, yeah, Steve, I figured that out 10, many years ago. So he agrees. And there's a general way in which, there's a general way in which local news can help create a sense of community, which I think most journalists 20 years ago wouldn't have said. We sometimes view ourselves as just kicking and holding power to account, and that's all that's really, really important, but it can't be the only thing we do. And he started this new group that's helping finance and make local journalism sustainable. And he says, there's no way around the idea that community journalism can only survive if the community supports it in some way. Whether it's through donations or philanthropy or subscriptions, there has to be community support. It's really important because it's really hard to have a healthy community without good local information. We find in areas that don't have local news, that vacuum is often filled by conspiracy theories and national news, which is more polarizing. And the best way to counter that is to fill the void with accurate local reporting. So I'm going to talk about the media some more. Talked about a little bit, but the media, in the sense of the media writ large, they dominate the public dialogue, whether directly through what they publish or indirectly through commentary on what they write about, and indirectly through social media and follow-on discussion. They'll CNN. I like CNN. I watch CNN, but they'll have actual news for half an hour and then they'll talk about it for 4 hours. It's like, how long can you gnaw on that bone? There's not enough meat on that bone to. The sense of the word media I want to focus on is another dictionary definition about the singular form of the word medium. And that is an intervening thing through which a force acts or an effect is produced. I went to my etymological dictionary, and it's media comes from a Roman word meaning in the middle, basically. So it's between the thing and the other thing. So we're there in the middle. It's an intervening thing through which a force acts or an effect is produced. In the scientific calibration, there's a saying that like affects like. You can't affect something you don't share physical properties with. Just to talk about the media a little bit, people think of us as being part of the media, local people, and I'll get complaints sometimes that, well, I can't trust you, you're part of the media, and they won't read us or they won't trust us. To which my response is, we're reporting on when and where the road work is supposed to be next week. What part of that do you think I'm slanting politically? So the media, I'm here to talk about is not that media. It's our role as the in-between place between, on the one hand, the collection of information, and on the other hand, the distribution of the information. That's the media I'm talking about, the medium. It's understood, so what are we doing? It's understood the newspapers, all right, there we go again, paper thing, that local news organizations will cover city news, the governance of the city, principally, but we're also expected to cover, the police, the fire department, weather, arts, local business, sports at all levels, environment, and much more. In the days when there were resources to be the journal of record, you'd also throw in births, weddings, and deaths. All these are all part, certainly not all, but a part of the life readers live as they go about their day-to-day business. And where else but in a newspaper would you find anything that collected all the elements of their lives in one tidy, well, more or less tidy, package besides in a newspaper? Each of these articles, each of these items, each published piece is another piece in a mosaic depicting the days of our lives. The more pieces, the more stories, the more resources, I might say the more pixels now, the more fine the portrait. Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious, the shared archetypes, patterns of ideas that we all share. Those are primordial patterns that shape how we express ourselves, even without us knowing or being aware of these influences. I call newspapers the community's collective consciousness, the lived, particular record of our actions as individuals and as a community. To make that picture accurate and informative of what's really going on, it needs to reflect far more than it has. We always want to do more. We always want to get that picture finer, more complete, smoother, and proportional. Every part of the community spectrum should be reflected in a newspaper's report. For too long, it hasn't been. It has and still does reflect a community that's richer, wider, and generally older than what's actually out there. Newspapers have ignored, minimized, and distorted coverage of others for centuries. I remember a decade or more ago when the Louisville Courier-Journal, Kentucky, ran what amounted to a correction notice apologizing for not covering the whole civil rights thing. It's like, oops, sorry. Better late than never, I guess. Our own state chronicle, the Oregonian, recently ran a similar, more extensive apology for what it's admitted and gotten wrong over the last century plus. To their credit. For newspapers to do the job that they should do, they need to be a medium for the full spectrum of the community. And there's at least three parts to this. Part one is who is doing the work. Newsrooms have an obligation to be as diverse as possible, to strive to make the inside of the newsroom as much like the outside of the newsroom as they can. Part two is the sourcing. So you got the reporters, staff. Part two is the sourcing for the stories that we're writing. When we go out to talk to people, we have an obligation to talk to all segments of the society to the extent we can in regards to the subject of the story. Sources should be diverse as possible. People we quote should be as diverse as possible. If they're not, you don't see all of what's going on in your community reflected in your report. We will have effectively cast a cloak of invisibility over part of our community. Part three, you got the reporters, you got the people that they're talking to, and then the subject of the stories. Part three is the subject of the stories, regardless of the ethnicity, age, religion, or economic class of the reporter or the sources they use. There's still the possibility the story they're working on could further the diversity of the coverage. I remember this really was driven home to me by a survey that Knight Ridder had us do in the early 2000s, the early aughts, about those not about the newsroom itself so much, but who you're quoting and what your stories are about, and who appears in your pictures too is another part about it. You know, how many people were of whatever age, ethnicity, religion, you can't really tell that from a photo generally, but and I was kind of stunned that we were talking to so many old white men. You know, it's like 85% or whatever. And it kind of sort of makes sense because you're calling government authorities and they tend to be that. But it also reminds you that, well, maybe we should, instead of talking to the government, we should call up somebody who's getting one of those bills in the mail, and they might be a, 22-year-old female. And they're just as much a part of that story about the utility department, the rate increase, as the government official is. So so that, there's nothing like paying attention to bringing things home. What gets counted gets managed, I think, is the corporate saying. So we were counting our sources and things. So that was a lesson learned. So why should people care? What difference does it make? It makes a difference in how well the newspaper is covering the community, on how accurately it conveys the range of what's really going on. The better, more complete, the more diverse the report we can put together, the better we can reflect the community. In so doing, we can part of the feedback loop that helps shape how we as individuals think of ourselves as a community. Newspapers, or community news organizations, are not only a value for promoting civic engagement, which is kind of at the top of people's minds. Studies show that if you have a local paper, a local community news organization, people vote more people run for office. Your bond rates are lower, which is a whole other discussion. This is weird, but true. It's not only a value for facilitating economic vitality by sharing information about availability of various resources, whether a new restaurant to eat at or a proposal to develop a new business park. It's not only a value for sharing opportunities about cultural events, but it's a value for shaping how we think about ourselves. The ideas we can think of are shaped by the words available to express them. Is there a word for blue? If we can't say it, if we can't express it, we will lose that impression as it goes uncaptured in language. What I'm driving at here is what's captured in the newspaper. This is as true of the vague notion of community identity as it is of our vague notions of self. So articulation is the value that we're looking for. The more accurate, insightful, articulate language we use to enrobe our concepts of self and community, the better defined, better understood they will be. Things left unspoken are left unseen by the mind, and in a way left unlived as fully as they might have been. So we're here as journalists and as community news organizations to serve as a medium for recording and advancing community life. Now I'm going to move right on to the pitch. So we ask you all to subscribe to our Ashland News newsletter. That's free. And if you can, become a sustainer, somebody giving a whatever amount makes sense for you. So just go to Ashland News and you can subscribe and support if you will. I'd also mention that a very related topic to tonight's topic, next week, Thursday, we're hosting a screening of a documentary about a small town newspaper that's actually a paper, and it's in a town called Storm Lake in Iowa. The paper won a Pulitzer for its coverage of some issues with industrial agricultural town, but that's hardly touched on in the film. It's about the people at the paper and the paper's value to the community. And I think it's relevant to every community which prizes the opportunity to find themselves through the local news medium. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions, comments, suggestions.
you talked in some vivid detail about the traditional model for newspapers being financially eviscerated over the last probably 3 decades or so. And one thing that got me to thinking about as we were talking is more recently how sites that aggregate news, Google, Facebook, Apple, et cetera, can essentially link to newspapers. National News could be one of them under certain circumstances, and don't have to pay for it. They, at the same time, of course, have sucked away the advertising dollars. I'm wondering if you see any solutions to that, and thinking in particular in Australia, I believe there was legislation passed that required those aggregators to pay the sites they were aggregating from.
That's correct, yes, and it is in Australia, and Google and Facebook said what a disaster it would be, and it hasn't really been that disaster, and it's actually helped the journalism landscape. The aggregators, they tend. I don't think it's as bad. The large corporate organizations, Gatehouse and Organic, which is part of Gatehouse now, I think it is, are strongly behind that legislation. That there is legislation out there that would do a similar thing in the United States as they did in Australia. I don't know that would help. It would help, but I don't know if that's the right answer, because you're still hanging your hat on the advertising peg, and it's a disjunct. It's a bank shot for the revenue flow. It's not connected to delivery of the product. You're delivering valuable information to an audience. The audience should help cover that cost. Whether that's done, there's some people advocating for some sort of government model, all kinds of issues with that. There's another piece of legislation that does it another way, that offers tax credits to people that advertise in local papers, that subsidizes reporters for local papers, that does it, that offers a tax credit for subscribing to local papers. And all those things tend to get revenue to local news organizations without influencing their content, which is the big bugaboo with government funding. So they're facilitating revenue. And I kind of like that piece of legislation better than the advertising thing, because the big corporations love that, because that's what they're all about. But I like the other legislation better.
So I work with 3 newspapers that are printed. The Illinois Valley News, the Upper Rogue Independent, and the Grand Pasadena Courier.
We can't hear you.
She works for 3 newspapers.
No, I don't work with them.
Well,
Yeah. And they're privately held. They're also financially stable. Can you comment on that with respect to what your experience is here, number one? Now, the second is, we have this Shields Blasek who lives in the Bahamas and runs the local guide that saps all the advertising out of our news entities. Can we shut him down? Or stop the mailing and waste of paper?
Yeah. I'm familiar with the Illinois Valley paper a little bit, and they're partly benefiting from public notices from the Josephine County. It's a crazy story in itself, but more power to them. It's the communities they're served. Well, for one, I bet their staff, we were talking anywhere from 1 to 3 people, so they don't have a big nut to crack with that, and their coverage areas are limited. So the revenue they need to generate isn't as much, and they're anyway. I can't, good for them. That's what I can say about that. What was the other part of your question? Did you have another?
Local guide.
Oh, the local guide, yeah. Boy, there's two of them. And
Sneak preview.
Sneak preview, thank you. And they both have a ton of advertising, and it just goes to the idea that the economic sector needs a way to get their message out. I would love for those people to become sponsors of Ashland News, but I think the readers need to do that. And
But why the migration? Why did that? Why? It was like a wholesale migration.
to those, well, they're the only game in town. You do the Google thing and you're reaching people who are online. They're TMC publications, total market circulation. And so you're basically piggybacking not on their news value, but on their postal permits. It costs less to be, 16 square inches in a mailed product than it does to go out and mail something to everybody in town. So it's a distribution thing. It's not about news or information. It just kind of gives me a headache thinking about it. Ed?
You've got some questions in the chat.
Okay.
One of them is just a comment. I especially worry the whole middle of the country that is becoming a newspaper desert. Voters are quite impaired unless the League of Women Voters is active in their communities, giving them access to impartial data. They have no accurate news. That's just a comment. So I don't know if you have a comment yourself.
It's not just the middle of the country. It's certainly part of it, but the West, because it's so spread out. But there's good work being done by Agora Journalism Center at the University of Oregon on tracking Oregon news deserts. And they recently did a study here in Southern Oregon. And there's one county in Oregon with no news outlets. And in fact, I think that's where the BLM takeover was a few years ago. Fortunately, they've got some good journalists nearby, but that county is bereft of local news. When I came here, it was like, God, you're in Jackson County. That's the only county in Oregon with 2 daily newspapers because they had the Mail Tribune and the Tidings, and Tidings was 6 days a week. But now where are we? There's 0 daily newspapers for a short while there, and now we've got 3-day and 5-day a week entities serving Jackson County.
2 slicks, 3 slicks, 4 slicks.
Yeah. University of North Carolina and Northwestern are both doing great work on those issues, the news desert research.
Someone else asked, what area of philosophy did you study in college?
I just got a bachelor's, so it wasn't that specialized.
And then another question, looks like to scroll down. Your remark about what is unseen doesn't exist. This is the point that OSF has been making about representation. What steps is Ashland News taking to increase the visibility of the BIPOC community in the area?
Good question.
Could you repeat the question so the people in the back can
We
hear?
can't hear.
Can you read it louder? Or
Let me see if I capture that. I talked about what is unreported is unseen, and that's something that OSF is trying to address through its programming. And what is Ashland News doing? Okay. Boy, with our staff, it's tough right now, but when I'm picking out photos and stuff, if I have a more diverse thing than not, and I'll go with the more diverse thing. I try and assign stories, and again, with limited resources, that cover things that we haven't covered, or it's a tough one. The OSF thing just reminds me that I think that's journalism too. I mean, you look at novels and theater, it's on a longer time scale, but it's also reporting and reflecting what's going on in the community. So I think that's an important part of our cultural landscape. That's obvious and known, but I also think of it as journalism. I mean, they're reporting on what's going on.
After the Alameda fire, KRBI 5 seemed to only feature white women who'd lost their home. And
Their cats.
I called them on it, you know. And after that, they got 2 anchors, 2 Black anchors, and they started featuring a more diverse community.
That was Kobe?
Kobe, yeah.
Yeah.
But Craig wrote me back and said how many people they'd done this and how many had done that. I mean, he was really
Well,
stressed
that,
about it.
yeah, and that's a locally owned, regionally owned organization. So that just speaks to responsiveness to
Right.
input. You know, if your boss is in New Jersey, like other local news organizations that remain nameless, you're not going to respond like that.
When you talk about Fox, what it calls news, and is that a growing phenomenon? Where is Fox at maybe in the national?
I don't know if the word is I'd love to or I'd hate to, but no, I'd love to. The issue that comes up all the time with local community journalism is things like a business press release. They go, are we going to run this? Is this free advertising? You know, should we even bother with this? And, you know, the question I asked, the way I frame that question is, by publishing it, are we in service to our source, to the business, or in service to our reader? And, you know, if it's in service to the reader wants to know about the new restaurant, believe me, that's our most popular articles. You got a new restaurant, you got readers. You know, or is it, you know, advertising a mattress sale? Not so much. But the thing with the recent news about Fox News is what their priority is. And it's not telling their audience what the truth is. It's telling the audience what they want to hear, what they wish the truth was. And so that's a fundamental principle that we see how they're aligned. You know, and you do it that way you will, but it's not towards news or journalism. It's towards entertainment or, you know, placating people. Yeah, whatever word you want to use, but it's been very revealing as far as how news calls are made.
What was the point you were making about OSF? It sounded like you were saying that that's.
Yeah.
You stand in there?
Journalism, you know, reflects not just the goings on, although it certainly does that, but you try and do contextual journalism. It's like it's where you get into the why and how part of it, and if you know, Long Day's Journey in the Night could be about the opioid epidemic, you know, but it's an impact story. It's like, how does that affect a family, you know, to have a family member with an opioid addiction?
Or it's a component of good journalism, not that the OSF
certainly not day to day, or not news that you can use today or this week or next month or even maybe next year, but as a way of informing your awareness of things writ large.
And so as you were saying that, it made me think that sort of theater is to journalism as memoir is to biography. Right?
Yeah.
We sort of cover the same terrain, but with a slightly different emphasis.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump in with a question that I'm dying to ask because it deals with my favorite kind of story. Can you think of a time when there was coverage that you either personally did or your paper did of an event or an issue which resulted in things turning out differently? It was something that wasn't going to get done that was gonna get done.
You know, I've worked some late nights and in Cambria, a great deal down there. We had a little house on the main street. It was where the sidewalk ended. Great. And so on deadline, it's a weekly, so deadline night, 2 a.m, drive past the Chevron station. And it's known that there's an MTBE problem. MTBE is a gasoline additive that lives forever and it's not good for living things. And the gas tanks were leaking as they do. And that was a known thing. And they, so I'm driving by the gas station, there's a pumper truck there. And it's a gasoline truck, but it's not over there by the pumps putting stuff in there. It's over by this remediation well pump that is extracting, keeping the water from seeping into the creek that's like 60 yards away at 2 a.m. And what are they going to do with that stuff? So I asked a reporter, great reporter, Kathy Tanner, and takes a couple of weeks, but she comes back and they're taking it to Fresno and they're pumping it into the oil wells for fracking. Fracking takes a lot of water. So they've got this water, it's got a little MTB, attack. And they're pumping it into the wells around, actually I think it's Bakersfield, but anyway. So we did the story and within like a month, they're no longer taking it there, they're taking it to a hazardous waste disposal facility. But that was a very simple thing where you just ask a question and things happen.
That's what community journalism is.
Anything else?
Do you have any writers here? And are there many writers here for you?
Well, Peter's done some writing and photography for us.
I'll volunteer to be one.
Oh, Art, yeah. Art's done some writing. Done some very good stuff. And he was with public radio for a while, was a news director in the Simi Valley. Anyway. Thousand Oaks. Yeah. Okay.
It looks like there's one more hand up in the chat, so I'm gonna see if I can do the allow to talk. And Larry Clark, if you have a question, now is your time. Nope, I guess not. All right.
I have a question. There's going to be a meeting on the 11th, which I think is Saturday at Jackson Well Springs. I think it's from 5 to 7 p.m. for the community to discuss the proposed 14-story cell phone tower, the 5G cell phone tower that AT&T wants to put on the Billings farm. And I'm wondering if you're going to cover it.
It's the first I've heard about it. So if somebody, if you know anybody who's organized, or if you could send me.
Well, thanks to Bert for honoring us with his presence. Thanks to the staff of the Highland Library that helped set up this gathering. Our next speaker series is going to be on April 13th, and that's going to be on the topic of trends in the wine industry and wine growing that have been influenced by climate change. And the speaker will be Greg Jones. Before you leave, I want to invite you to become a member of the Friends of the Library. If you're not already, there are some perks for that. Get to use this wonderful facility and check out books. There are forms available online. We don't have any in the room, but I believe they can assist you at the circulation desk. Is that correct?
Yes.
Anyway, it's by being the Friends of the Highland Library. Oh, we do have forms. We contribute to the mission of the library and make it even a better library than it is. And it's an outstanding library, the benefit for the students, but also for the community, those of us who come in and enjoy it. So thank you all for braving the weather to be here. We had a pretty good turnout considering the situation out there. And till next time.